Hello, welcome to Gardener's World and a very hot Longmeadow. It's been 36 degrees in the shade here the last couple of days, which is pretty warm. And we're seeing the effects all across the garden. Some things are withstanding it, but I know there's trouble in store. Take the clematis, for example, here in the Jewel Garden. Don't really like drought, and they don't like hot sun. They do best when it's slightly cool and they have plenty of moisture at their roots. Now we've got in here, we've got Étoile Violette, we've got Pearl d'Azur. These are wonderful, rich purples and blues, but I don't think they're going to last as long as they normally will. But to counter that, plants like the sunflowers, Tithonia, the buddleias, all the salvias are absolutely loving the heat and the sunshine. So it's an ill wind that blows a garden no good. Now, coming up on today's programme, Adderley visits Longleat in Wiltshire to see how some of the greatest landscape designers of the past have left their mark on this majestic garden.
Many garden trends involve planting trees in a myriad of ways. And here, those trees, or their cousins, are still in place.
We catch up with sisters Mandy, Rebecca and Kirsty as they plant up two new borders, one for shade and one for full sun.
Right, Kirsty, what do you think of all these plants?
Wow, it's lovely colours, I like.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
These are all for the sunny border over there. We've got
yeah.
lots of sunshine.
We head to the borders to visit a national collection of magnificent heleniums.
I love heleniums because of the colour range, which I find particularly attractive. The fact that they flower their socks off all summer long. This flowering extravaganza continues until into the first week in November.
And I shall be summer pruning. This end of the garden is normally quite damp, particularly as we go towards the edges of the garden. The flood actually comes in winter, and I've planted it with plants that will thrive in wet conditions. Well, it is certainly not wet now. It's very dry. Last few days have been very hot indeed, and so you would expect it to be dry. But the problem actually is much more long-standing than that, because we've had a dry summer, a dry spring, a dry winter. It was dry last autumn. So almost 12 months of exceptional dry weather, and that's really starting to show in all our gardens. And you can see it here in these orchard beds very clearly. And I think this, as part of climate change, is something that we all have to learn to live with and adapt to and adjust our gardens accordingly. And you can break it down so you can be very practical about it. To start with, if you have planting underneath trees, as we do here in the orchard beds, the trees will always suck up most of the available water. Any planting underneath a tree will be dry, at least in summer, if not all the year round. Also, you can use shade really quite finely and exactly. For example, either side of this path, you wouldn't think there was much difference. But on this side, hydrangeas, for example, are not looking too unhappy. The same with the thalictrums. Now, hydrangeas and thalictrums like damp, light shade. So you would think in the drought they would suffer. But they're okay here, but not so good on this side. So there can be really quite small changes. And you need to know your garden and adapt to that and plant accordingly. And the other thing is, I think we need to change the way that we integrate our spring and our summer planting. And this is either a very good or very bad example, depending on how you look at it. Because you can see there's a lot of bleached out foliage and stems and bare ground. And that's a result of the Camasias I planted in here. Now, Camasias are a wonderful bulb. They look fantastic in April and May with these blue flowers and lush foliage. But they're a plant that likes damp conditions. So when it's dry like this, they die back and they stop anything else growing around them, and it looks terrible. So what my plan is to do is gradually, over the course of the rest of this year, is dig up all the Camasias in here and transplant them into the orchard. And then when they die back, they can be cut back with the rest of the bulbs and then reassess my planting underneath. So I'll put the bulbs in here. And I think the point of what I'm saying is not so much here is a job that I need to do and get on with. This is long-term thinking. This is something that we are all going to have to deal with for generations to come. We need to change our gardens to adapt to the changing climate. And that's not something I particularly want to do, but we've got to, and we've got to be creative about it. So with the Camasias, I can just lift that. Our heavy clay soil, of course, makes a great lump. And somewhere in that, we will find the bulbs. There we go. Here they are. When you have soil that is heavy clay, or even very free draining soil like sand or chalk, the first and best thing you can do to resist drought is to add as much organic matter as possible. And that does two things. On the one hand, it opens out a heavy clay like this and enables the roots to move more freely and find the moisture. And at the same time, it retains moisture like a sponge in the organic matter around the roots, and then the roots can access it when they need it, rather than it just flushing straight through. So lots of organic matter. The second thing you can do is to mulch, and that stops evaporation and makes a huge difference in how the garden dries out. So mulching, correct planting, lots of compost, thinking about planting under trees or shrubs and how that's going to take up moisture really needs careful thought and planning. And this is a wake-up call to all of us, I think. We have to plan our gardens to cope with drought. Now, on one hand, this is a job, like lots of other gardening jobs, and I will work through these borders, taking out the Camasias and then replanting to cope with drier conditions. But on the other hand, this is symptomatic of changes that we can't reverse. The weather is getting hotter, it is getting drier, and no doubt there will be incidents of it getting wetter too, and we have to adapt. And whilst that's going to be tough on lots of levels, there's no reason why it can't be creative. We can still have beautiful gardens, but we do have to change. Now, it's time to go down to Poole in Dorset to pay another visit to the three sisters, Mandy, Rebecca, and Kirsty.
Hi, my name's Mandy.
My name's Rebecca. My name is Kirsty. I am head gardener.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Amazingly, this is our third year of gardening, and we're really getting to know what works in the greenhouse and outside. Back in spring, Kirsty's first lasagna bulb pot blossomed.
This is lovely growing flowers.
Having watched Monty, Kirsty knew how to care for her strawberries. We've got to get rid of all the old stuff.
Yep, tidbits.
The potatoes were chitted in good time. Wow, have they already started sprouting?
Yeah, well, it was to grow potatoes.
As this is her second time growing them, she's an old hand. Every time they peek through a bit, we've got to cover them up again.
We'll cover it up again.
Yeah.
But I should, yeah, go through. Hi, my dog.
Back to you in the studio. With her attention, the potatoes have flourished and the strawberry harvest started early.
Oh, look at that. And sweet and juicy.
We got thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yay.
So, buoyed with success, we set off on a major planting project, helped by our friend Paul. The problem with the border behind was it was full of plants we knew nothing about. There was weeds. So we got some help from Paul.
With the help of Paul, I did helping building and painting and
Dug all the roots out.
dug all the roots out.
There's two borders. This shady one and the one opposite, which gets sun from mid-morning. So we added compost and got advice on plants to suit them both. Right, Kirsty, what do you think of all these plants?
Wow, it's lovely colours, I like.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
These are all for the sunny border over there, where we've got
yeah.
lots of sunshine. We've got some nice purple ones. Your favourite colour?
My favourite colour.
What's this one called?
It's called Benedicta Persian Blue.
The Peter Persian Blue. Nice.
Smell like lavender.
They look lovely. I think the cats might like these. We wanted plants to attract pollinators. Can you hear that bee?
Yeah, buzzing bee.
So there's geraniums, daisies, and penstemon too. Ready for some planting?
Yeah, I do right now. This is a persimmon waving flower. It's that purple.
Where should we put this one? Down here?
Yeah.
Okay, put it down there then.
There you go.
Beautiful. And once they were all set out,
Yeah, let's do it.
Kirsty was keen to get going. It's like sand, this soil. We'll have to give these a good water when they're all in, won't we?
Yep.
Is that where you want it?
Yep.
Oh, Kirsty, that's amazing.
Okay.
Brilliant. As butterfly fans, we had to have a buddleia. It's a fast-growing, semi-evergreen shrub. I think that means that it might keep some of its leaves on in the winter.
Yeah.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh, cool. I love winter.
Well, you panic in the winter because you think that someone's stolen all the leaves, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, you won't panic about this buddleia because it's evergreen. Right, off you go, buddleia. With the first border looking beautiful, Becky wanted to add her contribution.
In the middle.
A fairy house.
Can I do it for you? Me and you. Yeah. About there. It's a fairy house.
Yeah, fur house.
Ta-da!
In the shady border, we want a woodland feel with ferns, alchemilla and crocosmia.
A beautiful forest plants. I like forests.
And in fact, the light does twinkle through the trees. There's some tiny little bits of sunshine coming through, look, dappled sunshine
Yep.
on the leaves. Nice. We used unorthodox planting methods.
It's going to plant.
Yeah, you grow plant, you
Yeah,
tell
it's
it.
going to plant.
But had an aptly named Astrantia. This one, Kirsty, look. It's a Stranta Major Superstar, just like you.
In fact, yeah, I am. That's me.
Yeah, it is. Right, let's get this one in. Once we'd finished, we topped up the planters with spare sunny plants. Did the watering. And we are really pleased with how both borders look. We've come such a long way in 3 years, and having a garden that improves year after year is such a joy. What do you think about what we've done?
A fantastic demo.
It's going to look amazing, isn't it?
A lovely garden.
And which is your favourite garden? Is it the summer sunshiny garden or the shady garden?
Summer sunny garden.
Why is that?
I like flowers, I like colours.
Oh, and I love the shady woodland garden because I like ferns. So we've got a bit of both, haven't we?
Yeah, I like a bit of both.
Was that a good day's work or what?
Yeah, great work.
Hey!
Yay!
High five.
Da-da!
Well, it's lovely to see you again, Mandy, Rebecca and Kirsty. And I like both borders. Really hard to choose, so I'm going to sit on the fence and just say they're both absolutely brilliant. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago, I combined fuchsias and regal pelargoniums for their colours as much as anything else. These lovely, rich plums and burgundies and purples. And that is going strong. But it was a result of a problem I had here, really, because this greenhouse had become too shady. And that was down to the vine. We've stripped it back as far as we can. We really pruned it hard and reduced it, but it's still comparatively shady compared to, say, the big new greenhouse. So I've tried to use that to an advantage and pull in the fuchsias and the regal pelargoniums, because these are two plants that will cope with shade. In fact, fuchsias actively like shade. I have to say it's been quite tricky balancing the watering requirements of them, because fuchsias need more water than the pelargoniums. So what I tried to do is keep them to the back, and I water towards the back with a hose pipe. I spray them to cool them down, and I water down the floor, and that cools the temperature, increases humidity, which the fuchsias absolutely love. I need to keep deadheading the pelargoniums to encourage more flowers. Now, this is not the conventional time to take fuchsia cuttings. You can do that ideally in spring when you've got all that new growth, or perhaps in autumn. But I've got one stem here that has got no flower buds on it and is really strong growth. Perfect for taking a cutting and make myself a nice new plant. Now, if I take this, I'm going to cut just below a node, and a node is just simply where the leaves appear. So I'm going to go like that, cut like that, and I have got here a polythene bag, because whenever you take a cutting, the crucial thing is to be quick. By putting it into a polythene bag, all the moisture that it's losing is staying in there. It's in a moist environment, but it is always a race between the decline of what you cut and the creation of new roots. It's a good idea to have the second part of taking a cutting, the pot and the mixture and everything, ready before you actually go out and cut it, and then you can be really quick. So this is the fuchsia in there. I've got a pot which I'm going to fill up with a mixture that I prepared, which has got almost 50% perlite and 50% Accoya-based compost. Very little nutrition, but that's not what I need, because what cuttings need is water and oxygen. And now what I need to do is just prepare this. If you have too many leaves on a cutting, they'll lose too much moisture before they can develop roots. So the first thing you do is take off most of the leaves and that. So we're just leaving the top leaves. That's a little bit long. So I'm going to cut this down one more time, so I need glasses. Again, just below a node. That will work well. Make a hole and push that in. You could put the bag over the top like that after you've watered it. And then what's so good about these sealed bags is you just seal it up around it like that, and that will keep the moisture in. Put it somewhere light, but not in direct sunlight. And that should root within about 10 days or so. And when you start to see signs of new growth, you know there are roots on there, then you can think about repotting it so that the roots have some nutrition to feed the plant. Right, I'm going to take this away and water it, but it's time for us to visit the first of your gardens this week. And suitably, on a blisteringly hot day, it takes us to the deserts of the deep south of America.
Welcome to my little bit of whimsy here in New Mexico. My name is Ian, and my pride and joy is growing my irises. And this is the border, the hedge, as you come up the drive. And I'm obviously very proud of this. There are a lot of challenges here in the desert, especially, we have a lack of water. So I make sure that the ground is well composted. Not too much, because irises don't like to get soggy. I fertilize them, and one of the other things I always do in the winter and the fall is I cut them right back and mulch well, and in the spring I fertilize them again, and everything seems to turn out right here. What I love doing with my gardening is bringing a little bit of Britain here to my life in the desert. I always was a fond gardener, keen gardener, when I lived in London, and living here in the desert where we're surrounded by cactus and other things, succulents, I just wanted to bring a bit of home to me here. I even created my own little hedgerow here, and needless to say, irises. This part of my garden is very British. I've been working on this garden now for 14, 15 years. It was just desert and barren. At the end of the day, it's always wonderful to sit here in my garden with a cup of tea, or even better, a nice gin and tonic. Cheers from New Mexico.
Well, hang on a minute, Nellie. No, I need you here. Now, we think it's pretty hot here, but for Ian and his garden, that's every day. I know that part of America, and it really is hot. And although it is extraordinary what he's managed to achieve in his garden, it does show you what bearded iris is really like. Real heat, real drainage, and lots of sunshine. Now, these are the pumpkins and squashes that I planted a few weeks ago with the sweet corn growing up through them. Now you can see they are very happy. They've loved this really hot weather. All the cucurbit family, cucumbers, squashes, melons, pumpkins, love hot weather and lots of water. So as long as you can water them, they don't mind how hot it gets. So I do water them every few days. But at this stage, you can realize how big they can get. I said you should never plant them closer together than a metre apart, and that is the very closest. They've easily overlapped now, and in fact, the lettuce that I planted in amongst them is almost totally submerged. What you need to watch at this stage is they don't develop too many fruits. That might seem like a good thing, but they won't all ripen. Far better to have 2 or 3 per plant that fully develop their potential than have, oh, you can have up to 10 sometimes, small fruits that never really do anything at all. So take them off. Simply cut them off as they appear, leave 2 or 3, keep them well watered, and round about the end of September, early October, they should ripen and be ready to harvest. And the sweet corn, you can see, is completely happy. It's rising up above the foliage, and that will be ready to harvest in about a month's time. However, the lettuce are starting to bolt because of lack of water, so we're eating them as fast as we can. Now I'm going to cut one now for our meal. They're a good size, and this salad bowl lettuce is particularly buttery and soft. Now, Nellie, let's put this in a basket. Come on. Nell. Good girl. Well done. Good girl. Good girl. That's great. Now, Abvili has been to Longleat in Wiltshire, where they have had a garden for hundreds of years, and in particular, where they have some magnificent trees.
Sitting in a wooded valley and surrounded by lakes and parkland, Longleat feels majestic, as if it's been like this forever. But as with any home, when new owners move in, they might change the curtains, redo the bathroom. They want to put their stamp on the place. In a house and garden like this, a string of top designers have created grand-scale changes over centuries. Many of those garden trends involve planting trees in a myriad of ways. And here, those trees, or their cousins, are still in place. So fabulously, Longleat has a wealth of historic tree-filled features at every turn. The house was initially a priory bought by the Thynne family in 1541. By the late 1600s, the garden was already looking smart. But then rigid formality arrived, starting with a top designer called George London. These straight lines were all the rage across Europe. Just look at the sheer scale of it. You've got garden rooms, got these beautiful, intricate parterres, and you've got these formal pieces of water. Everything is all symmetrical, but just look at these avenues radiating outwards. You even have one here leading absolutely nowhere. Everywhere you look, there are trees. Long avenues were very fashionable, but trees were also popular because millions had been cut down to build ships during the English Civil War. So planting was seen as a patriotic duty. New trees also showed strength and confidence in the family's future. The owners wouldn't see their trees mature, but their children and grandchildren definitely would. Long tree-lined drives were the height of fashion, showing just how much land the owner possessed. So some less wealthy owners used optical illusions. When the drives were a bit short, some people angled the trees to a point near the house to make the drive look longer. This avenue was created in 1732, and the double row has been planted with young horse chestnuts at the front, echoing that initial design. And there's more tree-filled features inside the ornamental garden. Pleached lime trees created these fabulous walkways, which gave you a glimpse out into the wider landscape. Their straight lines helped to create the garden rooms, but crucially, they also provided shade for plants and people. Aristocratic women in the 18th century wore so many layers of clothing. Shade was essential to stop them overheating. You can see why they had fans. But tucked amongst those formal garden rooms, there was a bit of wildness, or wilderness. This was a tame woodland within the garden, where the planting and atmosphere was a lot freer. These are cherry trees doing a lovely job of combining that formal meets woodland feel. But this liberated atmosphere often prompted other wilder events. In fact, it was often used for assignations where you couldn't be seen or overheard. This wilderness lime walkway flanked by clipped evergreens, the peacock garden and this flower garden were created by designer Russell Page before Longleat opened to the public in 1949. He honoured the 18th century design, and this has one of Longleat's famous labyrinths added in low lines of box. But the famous hedge maze is built on a massive scale. 8-foot-tall yew twisting and turning in paths almost 2 miles long. They were metaphors for the complexity of life, but with the added bonus of entertainment. With refreshments in the middle. Mazes were all the rage at parties as guests tried and failed to reach the centre. Though thankfully, designers didn't expect the kitchen staff to trudge the whole length. There was usually a swift, sneaky route into the centre. Unfortunately, the gardeners didn't get off so lightly. Miles of hedge trimmed on both sides and the top is a marathon of a job. Apparently, it takes the gardeners 3 months to clip it. When Lancelot Capability Brown arrived at Longleat, he swept away much of the formal gardens, creating lakes and planting trees into a new rolling landscape. To preserve his design, Longleat planted young shadow trees of the same species alongside the originals to take over in years to come. This is a beautiful tree-filled landscape, each generation bringing new ideas while honouring the past. This viewpoint by designer Humphrey Repton probably says it all. It's called Heaven's Gate. I reckon if the other side of the pearly gates is anything like this, it'll be fine by me.
Last time I went to Longleat was about 60 years ago, when it just opened out, the Lions of Longleat. And I thought that was amazing. And now I'm amazed at the time it takes to cut the maize. 3 months of hedge cutting. Wow. Now, how about these cherries? These are Morello cherries. We netted them to keep the blackbirds off, because as they ripen, the blackbirds love them. If you're going to use them straight away, you can just take the cherry and pull it off the stalk like that. But if you want them to last a little bit longer, then you need to cut them stalk and all. But when you're doing that, just be careful you don't cut the spurs, the little woody spurs that come off the side shoots that bear the fruit, because they will bear next year's fruit as well. And of course, these are not sweet cherries. They have to be cooked, but they make wonderful jam. They make a superb sort of jus for putting on ice cream or yogurt. They make a really good tart, and I'm delighted that they've survived everything that our blackbirds can throw at them. Now, still to come on today's programme. We meet a plantsman in love with one of the stars of the late summer border, heleniums.
It would be hard to imagine any herbaceous border without heleniums because of the sheer flower power you're going to get over such a long period of time.
And after a couple of very hot days, I'll be checking up on my container veg garden. It's very much a time of transition in the vegetable garden. Quite a lot of crops have grown, been harvested, and have been pulled up, and you're left with bare ground. But it's far too early to leave it over winter. You want to use every bit of precious space you can, because we've got another 2 or even 3 growing months ahead of us. And with the warmth that we have and warm nights, things will grow very fast indeed. And one of the things I'm going to put in here are dwarf beans, French beans, which grow really well at this time of year. Now, I've got a piece of ground here. I had some lettuce, and before that we had brassica. Just rake some sort of tilth. You don't need to be obsessive about this, because it is extraordinary how seedlings will push their way through quite knobbly soil. And you also don't have to dig in the compost, just lay it as a mulch, and the bacteria and the fungi, which are the really important part of compost, will do their work straight away, and the organic material will incorporate into the soil over the coming weeks and months. That is absolutely fine. Now, this is a variety called Purple Teepee French beans, or dwarf beans, they grow to about 2 foot high, and the beans hang down as beautiful purple pods down below the foliage. And they will germinate very quickly in this warm soil. Now you can sow these in rows, or in a raised bed like this, I like to sow them in a grid. And I just push them into the soil. So just with your finger, just push them down in. And don't be tempted to plant them too close. You want nice strong plants. So I think about 9 inches is plenty close enough. These will mature ready to pick, in about 5 to 6 weeks. So that takes us into the middle of September. And then if you keep picking them, they will go on producing new pods well into October. Right, that's phase 1. I'll just rake over that lightly and move on to the next phase. Now, one of the reasons why I've planted them fairly widely apart is because I'm going to have a catch crop in there too. And what that means is a crop that will grow and not either be interfered by or interfere with my main crop, which are the beans. And in this case, I'm going to grow some coriander. Now, coriander is one of those plants that people either love or hate. It certainly has a very distinctive taste, and most people associate that with the foliage, the leaves. And if the weather turns cooler and wetter, the leaves should grow fine and be ready to harvest. But on the other hand, if it stays hot and dry like it is and it has been, then there is a high chance that it will bolt. Coriander reacts to dry weather really fast by bolting, producing flowers and setting seed. But I like the seed. The seed is really good to cook with. So either way, win-win. And I'm simply going to broadcast it. Now, the seeds are the familiar round, hard little bobbles. I've got a couple of packets here. So I'll sow those. I'm just going to sprinkle them like that. There we go. Rake them in lightly. I will give that a good soak and then leave them, and they will all grow. Now, it's time to go to the second of your gardens this week, and we're off to the West Midlands.
Hello, I'm Claire Dark and I live in Wolverhampton, and this is my garden. I love my garden and I spend a lot of time in it. One of my greatest achievements is my willow dome, which we planted several years ago, and it's really coming into its own now. And it looks so fluffy in the spring, and it's there aren't too many holes in the ceiling of it, but it's filling up nicely and it looks really good. We had a lot of old bits of wood and all sorts of green debris that we weren't sure what to do with, and we then discovered this hugel culture idea of putting all the leftover twigs and bits of wood in a heap and then making it into a sort of raised bed. It looked like a load of rubbish when we did it, but actually it's really grown well and everything's flourishing in it. It looks really good. It's full of life. And of course, you know, it dispenses with the need of a garden waste bin, because you can just pile everything on and cover it over, and it all grows and enhances the garden that you've already, and uses the space you've already got. So it's really good. The other thing I do is if I see seedlings struggling in the path in my garden or even out on the road, I'll save them, as it were, and rescue them and plant them in a pot and grow them on. We've got a good system in Wolverhampton where people do a plant swap, and so I give the plants away. And it's a great idea to swap plants that you've got too many of, and you can get back plants that you don't have. So it's a really nice community spirit, and people do that a lot here. It's good.
The great thing about sharing plants and a community that propagates and does plant swaps is that because they're local, you know that they're going to grow in your garden, as well as having the chance to pick up some really quite rare and unusual species. It's a brilliant system. Right, let's put this here. The reason why I bought the ladder is because I want to prune this pear. Now, this is summer pruning that applies to apples, pears, cherries and plums that are trained in any way, whether they're espaliers, cordons, fans, or even a small bush that you want to restrict its growth. And that's the key word, because summer pruning is to restrict growth, whereas winter pruning tends to be to promote growth. And when you've got the leaves on at this time of year, cut it back and the plant won't be triggered into a vigorous response. Do exactly the same prune in January and you'll get a mass of shoots growing back as a result. So knowing that, you can then use it to get the shapes that you want. Now, in terms of this pear, which is in a good spot because you can see it's covered in fruit, it's on a south-facing wall, that's great, but I don't want it to grow up over the roof. I might want it to train it over the window a little bit, so I could leave some shoots there. It's not a question of just taking everything off, it's about planning how I want it to grow, how well it's growing, and then working with that, and otherwise taking off everything that's growing outwards or upwards too far. There are two things to think about. The first thing is not to cut off any of this year's fruit, and also to think about next year's fruit. And if you look here, this is a spur that's coming off, and we've got fruit growing from it. And just behind the fruit, you can see that the stem is swollen a little bit. And that always is an indicator that there will be fruit next year. So if you want to train a branch to carry fruit for next year, and I've got one here, if you see a slight swelling, so halfway down or three-quarters way down, cut beyond that, and then that will create a spur and bear fruit next year. If you cut it off, it'll take another few years for a spur to develop. Right, I think that's done. I'm going to leave those couple of shoots there so I can train them out over the door, and then in winter I can come back and have another pass, but bearing in mind that winter pruning will promote growth rather than restrict it. And the other good thing about summer pruning, particularly when it's so hot and dry, is it relieves the pressure on the roots. You're taking away foliage, you're reducing transpiration, therefore the roots don't have to work quite so hard. And all that will help the fruit, apart from anything else, so that there'll be less jettisoning of the fruit. If you see an apple or a pear dropping fruits this time of year, the chances are it's because it's desperately dry and needs to throw overboard anything it doesn't absolutely need. So this is good. This is a job done. Now, it's time to visit the last of your gardens this week. And we're going to the home of Charlotte Hugh, who lives in Bishop Stortford.
Hi Gardeners World, welcome to our new build garden. I'm Charlotte and this is Rex. So when we moved into our garden 2 years ago, it was a complete blank canvas like every new build is, and we were really conscious we didn't want it to feel like a new build garden. We just really wanted to create a garden with character that felt like it had been there for years. So we've spent the last 2 years transforming it completely ourselves and turning it into a garden that feels like it's always been here. One of the first things we did when we moved into our garden was build the seating area at the end. We realised that the end of the garden got the sun in the evening and we wanted a place to sit and to be able to enjoy a drink with friends, and then eventually set up the pergola with the climbers. And then we wanted to connect the areas of the garden together, so we built a hoggin path and lined it with these beautiful grasses. It's a mixture of miscanthus and Mexican feathergrass, which have gone mad in the last year. We've got a vegetable patch. We've got my potting bench area built out of pallets and leftover wood that we had. We've got quite a lot of reclaimed items in the garden. So we've got a few of these water tanks which we've used for planting. This is our reclaimed brick patio, which we laid ourselves. We've got a butler sink here, planted up with nasturtiums, some zinnia, which I've grown from seed, and some trailing lobelia on the edge. So today we're going to harvest the carrots that have been growing. Woo. Okay, first carrot. Thanks so much for coming to see my garden. I've loved sharing it with you, and I hope that this inspires other new build owners to transform their spaces, because it's amazing what you can do.
Thanks, Charlotte. Your garden looks really good. And I know that it's doubly difficult with a new build because of the problems of compaction. Because where the gardens are have been where machines have gone backwards and forwards and compacted the soil. And that can be very difficult for plants, both when it's very wet, it gets sodden and can't drain away, and when it's very dry, the roots can't get down and find the water. Here the grass borders are coping with the drought. But you can see that this ginger, which I only planted about a month ago, is suffering. Now, gingers need quite a lot of water, and also because I only planted it recently, the roots haven't had a chance to get down into the soil and go look for the water. So I am going to spot water this and give it a soak. When you're watering, don't be tempted to water the leaves. That will do no good at all. You need to water the roots. So point the water at the ground, at the roots, and give it a really good soak. And that won't need watering again, however hot it is, for another week, I wouldn't have thought. And hopefully we'll have some rain. Now, in flower is one of my favourite mid and late summer flowers. These are heleniums. This is actually a variety called Sahin's early flower. And I adore heleniums and would grow a lot more if I could. But they don't like Longmeadow very much. I don't think it's the soil or anything like that. I think it's to do with the fact that heleniums do best in full sunshine. And because everything grows so vigorously here, that unless a front of a border, they get shaded out and they die back quickly. However, last September, we went to visit a garden in the Scottish borders in Berwick-upon-Tweed, where the heleniums are magnificent.
Welcome to Tweed Hill Garden. I'm David Warden. Since 2018, I've had the National Collection of Helenium. I've been interested in heleniums for over 20 years. I love heleniums because of the colour range, which I find particularly attractive. The fact that they flower their socks off all summer long. It starts here in mid-July, and this flowering extravaganza continues until, in some cases, into the first week in November. It's almost like a raft of flowers hovering over the border. You can watch the bees going round in circles. It would be hard to imagine any herbaceous border without heleniums because of the sheer flower power you're going to get over such a long period of time. Here we have incorporated within the planting scheme some 92 different cultivars. Some classic heleniums are Rivet and Beauty. We use it extensively here. Chipperfield Orange, one of my favourites because of its ability to be able to tolerate poor soil conditions, and they've stood the test of time. In this area of the garden, we have two cultivars with contrasting fortunes. We have Ruby Tuesday. It is a really dark red, an excellent variety, probably the best that we have, which, as you can see, produces masses of flowers over a long period of time. So that is really a must in terms of front of border, a prominent position. It anchors this particular position in the garden at the junction between a path and the lawn. I don't think there's another cultivar quite as good. It is widely available. However, this cultivar, which is Helenium Moth, hasn't had much of a good time recently. It's now actually a threatened plant. It ceased to be cultivated commercially. It's one of my favourites. What I like about it is the apricot coloration, its height. It has real presence, flowers for a long time, and is generally worthy of being in many more gardens than this one. As a national collection holder, I need to ensure that it's preserved, that I continue to make sure it thrives here, but also to ensure that it's more widely grown. I'm carrying out propagation of this particular cultivar. This will be distributed by any means possible. I just need to get it out there. Most of this border was put together in April of this year, and I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. There's considerable variety. It is hugely important for me not to have the collection in rows or in a confined space. I don't like the idea of it being a plant museum. I'd love to experiment with the combinations to see how they work out. I do like a good mingle, and the Persicaria that's mingling with the yellow solidago is Persicaria orangefield, and trying to get into the picture are the red buttons of Sanguisoba Kanchan cranberry. But there is one star performer which I hope is going to blow your socks off. This is Helenium Carnival. It's new to the collection. It's a very blousy Helenium, possibly the most flamboyant Helenium that there is. There's still a lot of flower yet to come, and we're in mid-September, so this is going to go through till the end of October. It's unique in that the petals are much larger than most Helenium. Colours are vivid, so we can see it's certainly got its party dress on. There are two varieties that we have here which are different from the others in that their petals don't open completely. A cultivar called Tie-Dye and another called Loisde Week. Week being the Dutch for sails, because the flower resembles the sails on a windmill. This is one of my favourite cultivars, Rauch Topaz, which translates to smoking topaz. What I like about it is quite unusual to find these upturned petals, and that's what gives it one of its characteristics, which I particularly like. Helenium are a plant that loves full sun, but here we can't give it full sun because we've got woodland to the south, so it gets sun from the east and the west, and that has proved sufficient. It gives the border a zing, and it's a colour that is not represented at the moment in this particular area. So this experiment seems to have worked. This variety and quite a number of the varieties will require staking. Staking with branches is very effective. Here we use iron hoops, which are easy to conceal and are usually hidden by the vegetation in any event. Helenium are quite easy to look after. They don't particularly suffer from diseases. As long as you keep them reasonably well damp at the root and occasionally feed them if you can, then that will work fine. Helenium can provide continuity in the garden, and there will be a Helenium which suits your cottage garden or your herbaceous borders. I hope that I've encouraged you to give them a try. There will be a Helenium out there for you.
I think the truth is that if you want Heleniums to look as good as that, and didn't they look fantastic, you've got to make them the stars of the show. You can't hem them around with other plants. It's get them to the front of a border, don't crowd them, and just let them display their glory, and they are glorious. Now, in this weather, with all the heat, the first plants that suffer are containerized veg, because they need a lot of water. Now, I have been watering these every day, even so with different results. For an example, the chard, you can see, has bolted and gone to seed. And that's simply a defense mechanism. It feels that the drought's coming on, it's going to die, so therefore sets seed to keep it alive, even if the original plant can't. But the reason why I planted chard is because actually it's very good in drought. And if I cut this right back, there will be good regrowth that will be perfectly okay. So if I go right down to the base, cut like that, take this off. Now this is not going to be edible, so this is compost heap or chickens. There we go. Right, that's cleared the decks. What I'm left with is already some quite good green, healthy growth. And that will be more than edible. And as long as you take out the bolting stems as they appear, this actually should go on producing new leaves for many months yet. So I'm not too worried about that. And then you can see you've got the courgettes, which, despite the weather, have been pretty much untouched. And that's another reason why courgettes are a really good plant to grow in a container. They're adaptable, they're tough, they do need water and they need food, but as long as you keep on top of it, you get a good harvest. In fact, I need to cut those and take them in. And while I'm doing that, here are some jobs for you this weekend. If you took rosemary cuttings with me a few weeks ago, they should now be ready to pot on. And this applies to any cuttings you might take. Tip them out of the pot carefully in a block and then tease them apart, trying not to damage any of the new delicate roots. Pot each one on individually, making sure they've got plenty of drainage, water them and put them somewhere protected so that they can grow on and be ready to plant out, either this autumn or next spring. Don't neglect to keep on top of the weeds. And when it's as hot and dry as it has been this summer, they will tend to go to seed quicker, and that's what you want to avoid. However, once you've dug them up, you can leave them on a piece of paving or a dry piece of ground, and they will bake and dry out completely, and then you can put them on the compost heap. If you're going away at all, even for a weekend when it's as hot and dry as this, it's a good idea to gather up your terracotta pots and group them all together. This will reduce their exposure to sun and drying wind. And if you give them a good soak before you go, we'll see them through until you return. Well, the Paradise Garden here actually is a good place to be on a really hot day, because Paradise Gardens were made originally in the desert as an oasis, as a retreat from the barren, dry heat all around, where you would have water, you would have fragrance, you'd have fruit and shade from the sunshine. And in a sense, when the weather is as extreme as it has been, that's what all our gardens do. However, that's it for today. We will be back at the slightly earlier time of 7:30 next Friday. And whatever the weather, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.